I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. My name is Daniel Schuman, and I'm the Director of the Advisory Committee on Transparency. If you don't know anything about the Advisory Committee on Transparency, our purpose is to give advice to the Congressional Transparency Caucus, which has over 30 members of Congress, bipartisan, representing all different points of view, and the Advisory Committee has 18 different organizations that compose its members. Today's discussion is on reforming Congress, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I have an appreciation for spaghetti westerns, which is where I got the title, but I do hope that it'll be interesting to all of you as well. And I am so pleased to have two experts that I've gotten to know just a little bit over the last couple of years. To my right, to your left, is Representative Mickey Edwards. He was a congressman from Oklahoma from 1977 to 1992 and was the chair of the House Republican Policy Committee. He's a founding trustee of the Heritage Foundation, and he has been an educator both at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public Service and also the Kennedy School of Government, and currently serves as the Vice President of the Aspen Institute. And on my left is Dr. James Thurber. He is the founder and director of the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies at American University. He is a former LA to 4 different members of Congress, 3 senators, Humphrey, Brock, and Stevenson, and Rep. Obey as well. He has worked on 4 different efforts.
They're so young they don't even know who those people are. Sorry.
You mean I can't be madly about Adelaide? Is that the...
Right. His son.
And Jim has also worked on 4 different efforts to reorganize congressional committees, I think both on the House and Senate side. And I'm pleased to have both of you here. We're going to start off with Jim, and I hope that you'll talk a little bit about past efforts to reform Congress, sort of give us some historical context for our discussion on what's working well and what can work better here in Congress.
And thank you for inviting me.
Is this on?
It is. Oh, no, it is not. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure. You're really weird to be concerned about this topic. There's not enough people concerned about this topic. There's not enough institution builders around wanting to improve the institution of Congress, in my opinion. At least we don't see them prominently in the press. I want to start my presentation, and it'll be very brief, and we'll open it up to Q&A, by saying that I have not let reality get in the way of trying to improve Congress. I failed in every one of my efforts, except in the Senate in 1976, when they did reduce the number of committees, committee assignments, realign jurisdictions, and that's basically the framework that they've had since then. What's wrong with Congress? Well, I'm going to focus on the issue of too many committees and subcommittees and too many assignments. That's what I've been asked to do. But remember, I want to put it in the context of the functions of Congress: lawmaking, deliberation, oversight, checks and balances of the executive branch, representation of the public interest. We were just talking about, what's the public interest? It's hard to know. Constituency interests and specialized interests, but also educating the public about how it works, as well as educating themselves. They do an uneven job in each of those areas. I won't go through all those, but the committees are really part of all of that. We've had a lot of change. We've had 11 efforts between the 1946 Act that basically established the committee system in the House and the Senate. 11 efforts, 4 of them bicameral efforts. Almost all of them have failed, although some of them have made some minor changes. But related to the committees, and I'll get into that in some detail, is what the public thinks about the institution, what scholars and reformers think about the institution, and what the members think about the institution. And the public expressed itself this fall, as they always do in elections, and they're a little upset with the place. In all of the polls, they think it's too partisan. Nothing wrong with partisan politics, but the partisanship has gotten to be extreme. That redistricting to safe is not what we want. There are too many holes in the Senate. We tried to deal with that. The filibuster, tried to deal with it, didn't really change it. abiding by the regular order, a promise from Boehner and the chairman of the Rules Committee, meaning more deliberation by the panels, the committees. Actually using conference committees. We haven't actually used conference committees. I don't know if many of you know that, but you know, we've just bypassed them. And then the ethics committees, I'm sorry if you or you work for members on the ethics committees, but they're really moribund. They haven't been very active. Yes, there have been a lot of proposals from the committee, the Dave Skaggs group, the House.
Congressional ethics.
Yeah, right. There's been some referrals, but some people think that the ethics committee in the House has gone a little light on that. We've gotten rid of earmarks. The Tuesday, Thursday Club, still here, even though there are promises, as there always are at the beginning of a session. And then these permanent campaigns and wedge issues that sort of get in the way, people think on the outside, scholars think, but also the people think, in terms of having some closure and doing something. I'm not going to talk about any of those except committees. There are too many committees and subcommittees. Most people think there are 218 of them listed, but there are others that are ad hoc panels, task forces, other units that you could say. And so why is that bad? Well, if you have too many committees and subcommittees, you have too many committee assignments, and you fragment a focus on deliberation, gaining knowledge. You also have policy fragmentation, another problem with committees. I've counted there are 56 committees and subcommittees dealing with energy and environment. If you deal with energy, you're dealing with environment and vice versa. There were 88 committees and subcommittees dealing with Homeland Security before I appeared before the Rules Committee to suggest they have fewer of them. I left 1 month later. They added 2 committees. It shows how powerful I am in terms of an outside advocate. And now it's up to 109 according to Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security. There are too many assignments. You know, the assignments, if you have a primary committee, it's easy, you know, you're on appropriations or rules, but the Senate especially has the problem of being spread too thin because there are too many assignments. We tried to deal with this in 1976 and we grandfathered everybody, and that's got grandfathered, so we're back up to too many committee assignments. What are the barriers to reform? That's what you asked me to talk about also. Well, rarely have we succeeded in committee reform. And we've had mixed results. And you know the answer. And that is that we have turf and jurisdiction problems. When you give up jurisdiction, you give up power. It's really a redistribution of power. Now the way we did it in the Senate, and I'm sorry, it sounds like ancient history, is we aggrandized the barons, okay? We gave people who have power more power. And we went after people who didn't have a lot of power. And we took their jurisdictions and we consolidated. I was the staff member that did the Energy and Natural Resources Committee and Environment and Public Works. And we traded jurisdictions, and we, pardon the informal language, but we ripped off people who weren't very powerful, okay? And that is almost impossible in the House of Representatives. You go down this hall right now, if there's a Republican, you better say, "Good afternoon, Ms. Chair," because there are so many chairs that will immediately say no reforms. We cannot drop subcommittees. We cannot drop certain full committees. It's a matter of redistribution of power, especially when you get rid of subcommittees. 1995 was a successful year for that. David Dreyer, Representative Dreyer, did this out of his work with Lee Hamilton in the Joint Committee on the Organization of Congress. It worked. By my account, there were 36 subcommittees that were eliminated, long overdue. Renaming committees has occurred, but you know where they're really good? And I'll stop right now, because I could go on forever and bore the socks off you. They're really good at creating new committees. That's where the reform occurs. They've created Homeland Security, they've created the intelligence committees, they created the budget committees. I was around even then. And they've experimented with a subcommittee on House Appropriations for intelligence also. They're pretty good at doing that. It's the Ratchet theory of power, though. Once you have something, you ratchet it up, it's hard to ratchet it down and to realign things. The leaders would like it. The committee chairs would not like it, and members that are growing in seniority in the majority and minority side do not like it. So you've got a built-in opposition to all of it, and I'm sorry, it's not very positive. But that's my conclusion.
So having heard a little bit about committee proliferation, I think that it might be useful to talk a bit also about rising partisanship. One thing that in the 1940s and 1950s, the American Political Science Association had a series of recommendations that what we need here in the US was a more partisan Congress, because that meant that we could actually get more done. So I'd like to turn to our expert here, Rep. Edwards. If you could talk about the benefits and perhaps detriments of partisanship in general, and what you see as what's working well and not well in Congress.
Well, Dan, I'll go a little beyond that, but that one of the important things, and then I'm going to say we don't have very much time for this opening part, so I want to offer some cursory thoughts at the beginning, almost all of which will be counterintuitive. And for example, Jim's a very good friend. The proliferation of committees is a problem. Having too little use of committees where members can get the level of expertise that is required to be able to counter the executive branch, it would be a problem.
Yes.
And so the committee, the use of the committees is actually a very important part of making the Congress function. So I see that the Congress has three interlocking goals. The first is to maintain the confidence of the American people. The second is to address the important problems that are facing the country. And the third is to preserve the unique nature of our constitutional system of government. So let me just quickly run through these. First, as everybody in here I think will agree, and certainly what the Sunlight Foundation talks about, as much as possible, the work of government should be transparent. And that is obviously achievable both through laws that are governing campaign contributions and through public coverage of the actual work of Congress, including posting proposed legislation online and putting each member's votes on the public record. So I would guess everybody here agrees with that, and that's what your foundation is all about. But there's a bit more to it than that, and it's sometimes more complicated than it appears. Take campaign contributions. There is a tendency to assume that when somebody gets a contribution and then votes the way the contributor wanted that person to vote, that we have uncovered corruption. The proper way to check on whether that is what happened is to look backward, not forward, to see how a member votes, and then to see who contributed to his or her campaign, and then to see what position the member was taking before the contribution. If the member received a contribution and then changed his or her position, you've got a case that there's something wrong. If, in fact, the person got a contribution and then voted the same way that he or she had always voted, and in line with the contributor, you can probably assume that the contributor was merely supporting somebody who already had a position that he or she agreed with. And the reason I say that is that skepticism is important, but breeding cynicism is destructive. And to automatically draw connections when the connections are not there is a real problem in terms of public confidence in the system. Take the case of earmarks. I said I was going to say things that were a bit counterintuitive. The Congress has now moved to be more transparent in how programs get into the federal budget. and to eliminate indefensible spending for purely personal or local interests, to require public identification of sponsors, and to require public votes on inclusion of items in the budget, none of which existed when I was in the House, is a really great and important step forward. But to simply tell members that they cannot add things to the budget, and their job is to accept the president's budget, not only transfers Congress's single most important constitutional authority, control of the purse strings, to the executive, it also makes the process less accountable and less transparent because some bureaucrat in some agency made a decision to build a particular road or lake, and we don't know how that decision was made, why that option was chosen, and what personal interest the decision maker might have had in the outcome. So many of the things that we propose as reforms, bumper sticker solutions, make the problem worse, not better. And so when we talk about reform, it's important to make sure we're looking at what the ramifications are going to be. One maintains the confidence of the people by both transparency and objective analysis, not by presumptions. In addition, finally, on the question about public confidence, despite the events in Tucson, and Gabby Giffords, as Jim knows, is a very close personal friend of mine, it is simply part of the requirement of being in public office that you have to be out there and visible and present with your constituents. There is a part of our Constitution that is very unique, very different from the European systems, and that's the requirement that every member of the House or Senate be a resident of the state from which he or she is elected. We are supposed to be of the community, familiar with the concerns and preferences of the people who gave us a seat at the table in making the decisions. Second, in terms of addressing the problems, consensus is not possible in a body representing 300 million diverse individuals. Compromise is essential. Consensus is not possible. Compromise is essential. Compromise is also increasingly difficult in a society in which public voices take rigid positions and scrutinize every word and every action for possible deviation from the demanded position. Openness and transparency are vital, but so is protecting the ability to compromise. And that sometimes means allowing room for private conversation and private accommodation and private negotiation. I had the experience, just one quick aside from what I had the experience when I was in the House of serving on a conference committee. I was very involved in a decision that the Navy made to move some squadrons of aircraft from Maryland and Hawaii into my district. I got involved, got them moved to my district, to Tinker Air Force Base. And it was done for security reasons. And in a conference committee with the Senate, one of the senators from Hawaii, there are only two, but I'm not going to tell you which one. One of the senators from Hawaii said, you know, Mick, you did a really good thing. Those planes are much safer. It was the E-6A surveillance aircraft. Much safer inland, in the middle of the country than they would be either in Hawaii or in Maryland. I think you did exactly the right thing, and I'm going to oppose you with every bit of my energy. And I said, why, Dan? I didn't tell you anything because I was named Dan. And I said, why, Dan? He said, because you see that guy in the back row? He's a reporter for the Honolulu Advertiser. I cannot support moving jobs out of Hawaii, even if it's in the national interest, because I have a reporter watching to make sure that I will not compromise away what matters in my district. So again, openness and transparency are vital. I know that's what the Sunlight Foundation talks about, but so is allowing room for members of Congress to arrive at compromise. In the House, a couple more things I'll say. In the House, closed and partially closed rules, shutting off the opportunity for consideration of alternatives, solidifies the cohesion of the minority and limits options. Except in the rarest of circumstances, all House votes should proceed under an open rule with adequate debate, sufficient opportunity for consideration of alternatives. When I was in the House, the problem was that the Democrats were tyrannical and would not allow, they used closed rules. Republicans would not be allowed to offer amendments. That caused the rise of Newt Gingrich, which was not to the benefit of the country, in my view. And then finally, because of that, Republicans took over and did exactly the same thing, using closed rules and cutting off the minority. Next, the range of issues is too large. The Congress has no business worrying about strikes in the NFL or steroids in baseball, at least not with so many other important issues to be dealt with. And the time spent addressing the issues is too small. It's time for Congress to meet in session 5 days a week to arrange floor schedules and committee schedules so members can give adequate attention to the issues on the floor and the hearings in their committees. Okay, number 3, constitutional imperatives. Very briefly, it's envisioned in the Constitution that the people will retain control of their government and preserve their liberties by making their elected representatives preeminent. Article 1 is the Congress. Article 1 is the Congress that holds power over war, taxing, spending, creating government programs. And the Congress has increasingly surrendered those obligations, giving the President the ability to initiate military action, subject only to later withdrawal of authority, allowing the President to permit only a handful of legislative leaders to know what the government is doing in its military and foreign policy undertakings. Members of Congress are not members of the White House staff. The President is not the head of government. He is the head of a separate equal branch of government, and it is absolutely essential that the Congress reassert itself as the people's house of government. Democrats are very good at remembering this when there's a Republican president, and Republicans are very good at remembering it when there's a Democratic president. Neither is good at remembering that they are a separate branch, even if the president is of their own party. Finally, the Constitution envisioned the Congress and members beholden to the citizens, not to private political clubs. Political parties today have too much power over access to the general election ballot, too much power over the makeup of congressional districts, too much power over who gets appointed to sit on what committees and how much they have to promise to be loyal to the party in order to get a committee assignment. That system too must be changed. Most importantly, partisanship, the power of political parties, is undermining political democracy to the point that you can make all of these other reforms. And as long as we operate in a progressive era party-dominated system, nothing will improve.
Yeah, I really wish you'd given us some red meat to talk about there.
I said it all be counterintuitive.
There are a number of points sort of pick up on both of what you said, and I actually want to come to one of them first, which is Congress is a co-equal branch. We've seen Congress attempting to reform itself in the post-Watergate era, trying to make itself competent when compared to the executive branch. You see the creation of legislative support agencies, you see an increase in staffing, you see committee proliferation, whether good or ill, and I don't have an opinion, by the way, as I said, between these two distinguished gentlemen. But there are all sorts of attempts, certainly in that era, to build up Congress's capabilities, and then we've seen a drawing down since then, at least in certain respects. Congressional committees have 1,000 less staffers than they did 30 years ago, or 25 years ago. The legislative support agencies themselves have also diminished in the number of staff that are available. And you see a shifting from policy work to constituent services in members' personal offices. With these kinds of shifts, and the rise of lobbyists, and the rise of think tanks in the 70s and 80s, and those who fund those think tanks, the question that I have for both of you gentlemen is, Congress losing its edge as a co-equal branch? And if so, what should they be doing so that they can regain that role?
Let me jump in and say that my presentation was narrowed on committees and subcommittees and assignments, and say that there are at least a dozen other streams of reform that have been going on. Some of them related to yours, giving Congress more capacity to challenge the executive, but also the sunshine reforms that were very important from '74 on that brought more transparency. I want to just list them so some of the people realize that they weren't here. Democratizing reforms internally, having jurisdictions for subcommittees that were equal jurisdiction in the House of Representatives, where it used to be the chair of the full committee would chair a subcommittee, which was allowed, and everything would go through that subcommittee. Changing process rules, creating the budget committees, ethics and lobbying reform in 2007 and 1995, two other things that I've been involved with that I've been disappointed with. Campaign finance reform, but also the support agencies. First, we created the Office of Technology Assessment, which was the only institution that looked forward, that did futures work, peer-reviewed futures work, not controlled by committees. And Mickey's party got rid of it. The Republican Party got rid of OTA, about 250 people, and no one has really taken the place. I'm just, we're old friends. I can do this. And no one's really taken the place. I mean, CRS is a little operation, and GAO has an operation, and of course CBO tries to deal with it, but it wasn't the same, and that's really not good, in my opinion, because they have to rely too much on others. They do make assignments to the National Science, NSF, but I've forgotten the name.
National Academy of Science.
Yeah, National Academy of Science. Thank you. I'm losing it. And those are very important, but that's what OTA used to do, and it's bad. We had stafflation. I felt that we needed to cut back on staff a little bit. It was growing very rapidly, and one of the people who cut back on it was Dreyer, and I agreed with that. However, it was cut back on committee staff rather than elsewhere, and that's not good, in my opinion. I think overall, it is an institution that's tried to challenge the executive branch, but in the areas mentioned, power of the purse and the war powers, I think they've really given the executive branch way too much power, and they're not challenging the president enough. And I used to work for Dave Obey. Dave Obey would have given you a speech about earmarks also. But under the circumstances right now, I think it's okay to have a moratorium for a few years and then come back carefully with it.
I think part of the problem is attitudinal. Denny Hastert, who is a good friend of mine, actually believed, and in fact I think Bob Michael did too, that it was the job of the leader of the party that had a president in the White House to be the floor leader for the president. Nancy Pelosi's a good friend, and even though I disagree with her on virtually everything, one of the things that she was quite good at was remembering that she did not work for the president, even though she liked the president, agreed with the president, that she was the head of a different branch of government, and was quite willing to challenge even the president of her own party. I think that's important. We kind of, and the American people too, have lost perspective of this. Why do we start with the president's budget? It's not because the president is supposed to be the one who makes those decisions. It's because the Congress ordered him in 1920, to prepare a budget for the consideration of the Congress. Why does the president come to give the State of the Union speech? Is it because it is his job to come tell the Congress what is it supposed to do? No, it's because the Constitution says the president has to report to Congress on where the nation stands. And what's happened is that this body, the House of Representatives, even worse than the Senate, but not exclusively, has forgotten that the Constitution does not give the Congress power. It does not give the Congress authority. It gives the Congress duty, obligation, responsibility. And the Congress has not lived up to those. One of the people who has come in, Danielle Bryan, who runs the Project on Government Oversight, does great work in trying to ensure that there is adequate oversight, not only from outside organizations and the press, but the Congress over the workings of the government. And yet, I'm quite familiar, and she is, that you have members of Congress trying to get information by filing Freedom of Information Act requests, because they don't realize a member of Congress, can go to the committee chair and demand the information that they need to be able to do their job, which is something that Congress has been authorized to do by the Supreme Court, that you have the right to the information you need. So I think, there's a fundamental, let me put it this way. I have watched, it's much more than it used to be when I was here, people who get elected to office and they see themselves as Republicans or Democrats, not as members of Congress, not as the people who have the obligation to manage the government and the solution of the problems. And that's the greatest single problem in this institution. You can work out the committee structure. You can work out how you're going to manage your ethics. You're going to work out how much accountability to have with earmarks. You can solve all of those problems. But as long as the Congress forgets that it's its job to ensure that the people remain in control, the system is irreparably broken. And part of what I said in here, and what you asked me about, you watch the way that we have, I've seen it happen. I still have my card. I still use the members' gym. Still use the same treadmill I used when I was on appropriations. And I'll tell you, you go down there and you talk to the members privately in the gym, and you can talk about what the committee is, what committee members and committee leaders are told they must do by the leadership of their party, because it is to the benefit of their club in the next election. And you wonder who is watching out for the public interest instead of the party interest.
You can measure that. We do weird things in political science. We have party unity scores. They've gone up from the 60s into the 90s in terms of probability of a member voting on a party line to vote with the party. Part of that is realignment. You know that the South has become Republican. We now don't have three parties, Dixiecrats, Northern Democrats, and Republicans. And so that gets back to your original question about responsible party government. That's what it was about. We have a form of responsible party government, but we lack civility, we lack comity, and other dimensions that help bring about compromise behind the scenes. Sometimes I agree with Mickey about that. That's not counterintuitive. It's the way the place works. That's the way the lame duck worked. There were agreements that were made, not public, and they were quite productive during that period and protected in some cases, and I think that's okay, personally.
So let me ask then, as we're looking at, continuing to go on, you had raised, Representative Edwards, sort of 3 points in your statement. And the first one focused on the confidence of the people, and that we all know when you look at polling data that Congress is at the lowest in terms of how people view it in whatever the last 50 years, in terms of people being more cynical. They like their individual representatives for the most part, but they don't like what Congress is doing. And you're talking about this realignment where you have now 90% of people voting in line with their parties. You're talking about the same thing as well. Is that what's driving the system?
And before he answers, I thought you said competence of the people, but you said confidence of
yes,
the people.
yes.
Lee Hamilton does a survey every year, and I participate in it, about grading the people, as well as lots of other dimensions. Did you participate in that survey? And then he reports it, he just reported it, and everybody that responded to it, former members and academics and others, gave the people a very low grade in terms of understanding how this institution works. So the institution needs to do a better job explaining how it works to the people. Maybe they won't like it, but at least they need to educate the American people about the process up here. I'm sorry, Mickey, I jumped in.
That's good.
That's true. Congress needs to do it. The public schools need to do it. After I left Congress, I taught at Harvard and then I taught at Princeton. Neither of those schools, both do wonderful jobs at a lot of different things. Neither one of them does a very good job of teaching people about the system and how the system works and about the legislative branch of government. The public schools, the elementary and secondary schools, do a terrible job about teaching. And look, I read the Washington Post. I'm sorry, I do. They have more reporters per inch who know nothing about government, than any newspaper I've seen. I mean, I contacted Dana Milbank one time after he talked about the president going overseas. This was President Bush. The president was going overseas to act in his other role as head of state, stepping out of his role as head of government. What are we, Peru? I mean, when did we start having, a head of government? But it's persistent, about the committee structure and so forth. One of the things that Congressman Issa got criticized a lot for, his demand that he was going to do oversight hearings. What is this, another attack on the president? Well, oversight, as Danielle and Pogo always point out, oversight is a fundamental responsibility of the Congress, oversight over the executive branch and the agencies. There are lots of those kinds of reforms. I think that probably Jim touched on one that was a problem. That's reducing the amount of staff available to members of Congress to do their jobs. That's one way you can have real reforms. That the government is large, expensive, it takes on many responsibilities, and we have to have the staff to be able to make sure that we're voting intelligently, that we get the information that we need. I'll give you my own political perspective. There is nothing in the Constitution that requires small government. It requires limited government. There's a big difference. Small is a matter of how many people you have. Limited is what you do, what you get into. And there are two different philosophical and constitutional questions. And so I think Jim's on a very important point here, is about Congress has to in some way have the capacity that it needs to be able to do its very important job.
Could I add to oversight? They have had oversight reforms. There was a requirement to have an oversight calendar for each committee, and when you went forward to get your committee allocation of money, to have that. It's ignored. We have more oversight, by the way, when there's divided party government. I like that because I like oversight. I like them doing that. And when divided party government creates more oversight. But they should look at the existing rules. So on a lot of these reforms, I say, before you start passing your reforms, just enforce the ones you've got, because there's a whole bunch of them on the books that people
discover which ones you can enforce.
Yeah, right. There's some that you can't enforce, but you could in this case. You're probably on the Appropriations Committee or something. Right?
I know.
The Appropriations Committee can say no money unless you have this calendar and you abide by it.
So now that we have audience participation, I welcome more audience participation. So please.
My name is Lisa Garcia, I'm a senior investigator at Judicial Watch. I had two questions. One had to do with, fortunately at Smith College, thank you. Fortunately at Smith College, I think they did do a good job of explaining the legislative system under Professor John Balmer.
He's good.
And I guess the party system would be a way of sort of channeling information to the public so that their information rich in such a volume of information, so many members, how they get their information is through the parties. So to the extent that the party system has to be abolished, I would question Representative Edwards if it would make more sense to follow along the multiplicity of factions sort of suggestion you made with regard to having more committees rather than abolishing the committee system or narrowing them down. Having more committees actually makes people sort of aware of different responsibilities. Similarly, isn't it just a case of having more parties, not less? So that would be the one. So Tea Party being, maybe we don't have Dixiecrats and our Northern Democrats, but we have the Tea Party, so there's a third party. If we had 4 or 5 or 7, perhaps that would be the answer there. And the other one's about the staff reduction. In fact, we spend like 5 times as much on each staffer here with student loan reimbursement. Each office is autonomous, so to the extent that they get a budget and choose to hand out $100,000 to 3 people as opposed to $20,000 to 5, I mean, it really is a matter of that representative having the onus being on that representative to arrange their office. And we do have hundreds of free labor people, college graduates, even lawyers running around doing constituent services. So that's not really the issue. That's a free service.
So I'm actually going to address the second one simply because I can't resist. I issued a report in December on congressional staff salaries, where we looked at the number of staff, the pay of staff over time, and things sort of along those lines. And what we found is that congressional staff, adjusted for inflation, are making the exact same amount of money for the same job title that they were earning 25 years ago.
Including tuition reimbursement?
It didn't include tuition reimbursement.
That's
but
a huge benefit when you're talking about
tuition reimbursement is without question a significant benefit, but even if you were to factor in tuition reimbursement, it still wouldn't even be close. It's not, I mean, we're talking a factor of 2 or 3 here, so it's not even going to be in the ballpark. And tuition reimbursement, I believe, is also limited to a certain amount of money per staffer. I think it's either 5 or 10 grand per year per staffer, so you might want to, I'm not sure, but I believe that's correct. You also see that the
It's
overall...
$835 a month max.
So $835 a month.
$835 a month max. It's subject to each office's authorization for each particular person, and it's only for federal subsidized student loans. So
Yeah.
Harvard tuition notwithstanding, you're not getting federal loans for all of that.
Federal subsidized loans at Harvard.
Not, but there's a cap on the amount you can get. You're not paying for Harvard tuition with your Stafford loans. So.
Thank you. So, and when you look at the number of staff over time, so House personal offices have 17 staff, 16, 17. There's a pay cap, but most offices don't hit that particular number. And you see a shifting of the staff. There used to be more based in DC than based in the district. It used to be a 2/3, 1/3 ratio. Now it's 50-50. And the reason why that matters, of course, is most of the policy work is done here in DC. So what you see is a diminution in the ability to do policy work because people are engaging most likely in constituent services and things along those lines. So I've spoken enough. I really...
Let me address the party thing. It's a little counterintuitive, weird, in fact. But our parties back here, in terms of party unity votes, are very strong. But they're not very strong in many areas of the United States. There's self-recruitment going on. So the way I like to put it is, we have over 100 parties. The party, I come from Oregon. The Democratic and Republican Party in Oregon is very different than the Democratic and Republican Party in Mississippi. And that expresses itself. And if you have self-recruitment going on, you even have actors getting elected, and weightlifters, and other people that have names in other ways, and maybe 35, maybe 40 people from the Tea Party movement. You know why we don't have multiple parties, because we don't have proportional representation, and it's a fixed deal by the 2 parties to getting access to the ballot in most states. But I say, the expression of diversity in America is expressed through the parties quite well. And that's one of the reasons this place isn't efficient, because they have very great differences between Utah and Oregon and the People's Republic of Berkeley and, other places like that. There's great confrontation. Thank goodness that we have that. And so I'm not that worried about a multi-party system personally. And if the Tea Party movement, like the Reform Party movement under Ross Perot, has enough organization and money, they can get on the ballot. He got on the ballot in all 50 states. It's the last time that's happened. And so, we have it. It's just very hard. So I'm not that concerned. In terms of education of the public, I think that Mr. Dreyer is doing he's promised to televise Rules Committee hearings, for example. I think that's great. C-SPAN has been great for the American public. And I think we need more of that. I served for years on the board of the U.S. Capitol Historical Society, and we fought with whoever made the decision to have a film in the visitor center that actually told people about the process. The building's important, but it's about the building. You go to Williamsburg, you get a movie about the legislative process during colonial times. It was too controversial to show how a bill becomes a law and the role of committees and subcommittees. It's ridiculous. Think of how we're missing the opportunity, especially for young people, to understand how this place works. They come out of here, they remember the statue from Hawaii, you know, the bishop, and a few other things, and that nobody's on the floor of the Senate. Well, they didn't get a film, an explanation about the committee system, which is very important.
So, would you
Well,
like to say something? Yes.
I would just very quickly, because you give other people a chance to get in there, two things. In terms of education, what the parties instruct the people about is their perspective, why their view is the better one and the other view of the other party is not the better one. But as Jim said, look, democracy is not about policy. It's about process. You can change policies. You can adapt, make adjustments to your policies. Democracy is about process. It's about how the decisions are made. And that is not going to be taught by the parties. More parties? Look, the parties we have now are already, so locked in and rigid to their own positions that during the end of the Bush presidency, the beginning of the Obama presidency, it didn't matter what it was. TARP, stimulus, Kagan, Sotomayor, healthcare. It didn't matter what it was. Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other side. You can't tell me that if people are doing their own thinking and concerned about their constituents, they're all lined up. So you're going to have more parties. You're going to be Israel, or Italy, where the tail wags the dog in order to have a coalition. Somebody who has 5 votes, but you need those 5 votes in order to be a majority, gets to dominate the process. Well, I had this very quick example. The president, who I had actually been a foreign policy advisor to during his campaign, George W. Bush, made the decision that when he issued 1,100 signing statements, he as president would decide whether or not he had to obey the law. So the American Bar Association had a task force to look into that. I was on the task force, and then the president of the ABA and myself were the 2 people who testified before the House Judiciary Committee. So here's position 1. Given the complexity of issues, the breadth of the issues, and sometimes foreign policy implications, the president should sometimes be able to say, I know it's the law, I signed it, but here's, there are circumstances. That's one side. The other side was, this is the president of the United States in a democracy saying, I don't have to obey the law. And I testified before the House Judiciary Subcommittee on which every single Democrat was on one side, every Republican on the other. There was not one Democrat who saw any merit in the idea that the president, under these circumstances, with a comprehensive omnibus bill, should be able to say, I don't need to be bound by this. And there wasn't one single Republican who thought there was anything wrong with a president of the United States saying, I don't have to obey the law. That was party. It was all about party. And that's why I'm saying, you got to break that.
So wait a minute, I've got to challenge you.
No, you don't.
Yes, I
Jim.
Listen, it depends. Those are big issues. They're very important. You've mentioned it, but it depends on the issue.
Yeah, sure it does.
And if you go to the Science Committee, you found Bart Gordon running a bipartisan committee with lots of comity and civility, producing a STEM bill, science, technology, engineering, math bill that both Democrats and Republicans like. And we may find that now with education also.
That's true.
Because what Arne Duncan is doing, a lot of Republicans like. So it depends on the issue. Each issue drives different politics, in my opinion.
That's right.
Okay.
I agree.
Behind, you, sir.
Should I use this or should I
Please.
just boom out?
If you wouldn't mind using that, it makes it easier to pick up.
Okay. John Sanford, Cato Institute. I wanted to say a couple things or ask a couple of questions about something Nikki said. The Congress is in the federal courts right now arguing that its power under the Commerce Clause, in fact, is unlimited. So it's wrong to think, I think, that Congress itself thinks that we have limited government. But, and isn't it that point of view actually that has caused the committee problems? Because if you have plenary power over all economic activity, then you're going to have all these subcommittees to try to control something you really can't control. That's a question. The other one goes to your remark you made about attitude, Nikki, which was, I did a case study of the Thurber legislation, and what sort of appalled me about it, about Congress, was the members did everything they could at every moment to escape responsibility for the entire thing. That was their major concern. And second, they had no pride whatsoever in being congressmen and no sense of fighting their corner of things, which I would think James Madison would be very surprised about and would say that it makes the balancing of powers and division of powers unworkable when members are so suborned to the executive and its expertise.
I was not going to surprise you, but I agree with you. Down the line, I think you made very good points. Members of Congress too often don't remember that when they stepped across that magic line, as I did, one day I was a Republican candidate, and then I stepped across the line and I took the oath of office. And I was, screw the party. I was now part of the government. It was my job to serve the people as part of the government. And there's some people don't leave that behind. They don't leave the party label behind. I've already blamed Newt for it, so I won't do it again. But one of the things that has to happen is that members of Congress have to understand that they're balancing a couple of things. They're balancing the input of the constituents. It is self-government. But they are also having to balance, as Edmund Burke put it, use their own judgment about what's the right thing to do. And all of that has to be done within the constraints of the Constitution, which doesn't allow for a reading that the power of the Congress is unlimited. The power of the President is not unlimited. The power of the Congress is not unlimited. The Congress has preeminent authority as between the branches, but it doesn't have authority beyond what the Constitution is. This place where I'm very familiar with Cato, like Cato, but I have a big disagreement with Roger Plum, who seems to think when you get into the area of foreign policy that the Constitution doesn't matter a lot.
Some others do.
Yeah. I agree with basically what you said. I want to say one more thing, though, if I can, about the parties. When I talk about control of access to the ballot, in the state of Delaware, Delaware has 900,000 citizens. The person who, and by every poll, Mike Castle, and I happen to like the guy who's a friend of mine who got elected to that seat, the Democrat, Chris Coons, but Mike Castle was very popular in the state and probably would have won. That's why Beau Biden didn't run. And in that state of nearly 1 million people, 30,000 voted for Christine O'Donnell, as a result of which, because the party gets to choose who's on the ballot in November, Mike Castle couldn't run. In the state of Utah, with 3 million people in Utah, 3,500, about 1/10 went to a convention, decided that Robert Bennett could not be on the ballot, and therefore he was not on the ballot for the rest of the 3 million people in Utah. So I'm not anti-party. I'm anti-letting the parties so screw up the system where it is not the majority of the people who choose. It's the partisans and zealots of a particular political power-seeking club that choose. And that's the problem that has to be broken.
I've got to jump in on this one.
Do it.
Because it's another hopeless cause I've been involved with. For a long
He's
time.
a political scientist.
And it is I'm a weird political scientist because I get involved in politics. Most
Yeah.
of them don't know about politics, in my opinion. But anyway, let's keep rolling. She's my former student. She knows what I'm like. I've been pushing for commissions to do redistricting. The facts are, last election, we had a whole lot of competition. It was wonderful. I like competition. in the general election, about 85 seats. Before that, 65, 62 before that, and 26 before that. So what's that mean? The real election is the primary election. And the primary election turnout in America, this last election, was 18.8%. But if you're in Berkeley, California, where they outlaw Republicans, this is a joke, about 8% turnout. So 8% turnout to select the next member of Congress, because that's the real election. Utah convention system, 3,500, I thought it was 2,300, 3,500 selected, the next person to go to the Senate. We need to do something, since it's another story, about redistricting. Because I like competition. The more competition you have, the more people move to the middle ideologically. They're not rhinos, they just move to the middle ideologically, and it's easier to find bargaining and compromise and to come forward with solutions to real problems. They do that in the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, and they have equal populations compact contiguous, but they add the fourth variable, and that is they try to maximize the number of seats that are competitive. We need to do that, Mickey. And that's related to party, because the people that turn out in these primaries, in my opinion, frequently they do not represent the American public generally. If you look at the attitudes in the surveys, they're on the far left and the far right. And we've got a problem of the endangered species here. It's not the polar bear, but it's a moderate, like you were.
No, I was chairman of the American Conservative Union.
But you're still
I was
moderate.
I was a founder of the Heritage Foundation.
That's-
Before I get to you, can I do one quick add-on to this? Because you're talking about reform, and in reform of the primary system and all. I mean, there are some states, when I was teaching at Harvard for 11 years, so I mean, I got familiar with Massachusetts, strange place. There's virtually no Republican Party in Massachusetts. Scott Brown got elected because such a large percentage of the voters there are independents. You could have a 10-person primary in Massachusetts, which is not unheard of, and win 15% of the vote. So 85% of the people in your own party didn't want you. But because there's no Republican Party, you win. Almost every single member of the Massachusetts delegation was elected in the first place with a tiny vote and then had the power of incumbency. So not having runoff elections is again a problem of letting smaller and smaller and smaller groups of people ultimately make these decisions. Okay, sorry, he had his hand up.
Yeah, just two quick questions. One, a commission for redistricting, do you think everything should be on the table, including CRA districts?
I think we're going to experiment with California right now, because they do it at the lower level, as you know, for the state legislature. Now we're going to do it for Congress. I redistricted the state of Washington. I was fresh out of graduate school in 1972, which shows how old I am. And let me tell you, then we had two CDC machines, huge machines. We merged census data with election data. You can do anything and meet the law. So why don't we start doing more about competition? Because the parties are drawing the lines for who the member is going to be in a bipartisan way through deals as they did in California, Democrats and Republicans, or by one party. I just want to have more competition. I like competition.
And then my second question is about...
I didn't answer your question probably, did I?
No, I hear you.
Yeah, right.
Not you didn't.
I reframed it. Frank wants here, my friend.
Sure, that's good. The issue of the value that C-SPAN adds to the call of transparency. C-SPAN has taken a sausage factory and turned it into a circus. And to what degree do you think sort of the cameras there all the time, need to have Elmo now testifying for the House Education Committee, to create sort of a media buzz about a hearing and get it on the nightly news. And there's a lot of media drive now that goes on for hearings because there's cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
Do you think on a net, I mean, it's still better, and what is the downside of having it?
Well, the first speech I wrote in 1973 was for the leadership here against C-SPAN coverage in the House. So I'm smiling because I had all these arguments about playing to the cameras and everything. I think on the whole, it's very good to have more transparency and let people see what it's like. And if they're going to have silly things like Elmo or something, let the consequences hit the people who are doing that by showing everybody what it is. No, I think we should have more of it. Yes, it has had an effect of people dressing up a little bit better, having flip charts about the debt and the deficit, getting more media savvy about how they present things, and then sometimes going to the extreme. But I think if you take everything into account, it's a good. And the Senate, delayed for almost 8 years covering it because they were worried about, the old bulls were very worried about what you just said.
Back to its attitude. John Conyers became my hero when I can't remember now what celebrity was brought in to testify by a subcommittee chair, and Conyers was irate. He said basically, after this person, Colbert. I mean,
Oh yeah.
You need to have the leadership in the institution stand up and say, we're not going to find out what to do about the national debt because of some, Christine Aguilera. I mean, give us a break. This is a serious institution dealing with the serious problems of a nation of 300 million people. And it's funny, when I was on the Appropriations Committee, and there was a question why we got into this is beyond me, but we were talking about whether or not the movie industry should be able to colorize films that had originally been in black and white. And Jimmy Stewart came in and sat in the Appropriations hearing room. But you know what? He wasn't invited to testify to a subcommittee. He wasn't invited to testify to the committee. And in the Appropriations room, he sat off to the side just like everybody else. And I guess most people recognized him, but that's all there was to it.
Was he in color?
Well, look, I am a professional writer, but, so what I said was, well then, if you think that Stewart was opposed to allowing the changes to be made, and I said, well then, do you think a director or producer ought to be able to rewrite the book from which it was taken? We didn't get into that.
Yeah, right.
Part of it is that if this institution insists on demeaning itself by bringing in celebrities to talk about these issues, then it deserves all of the bad vibes it gets from the people. So hopefully the new leadership will say, we don't do that. We don't do that. And
As they did with Colbert, in my opinion, it backfired, in my opinion, with Colbert.
yeah, right.
So, and I do want to add sort of 3 points to that. One is that media stunts existed before television was in Congress. That there were, during the 50s when they started bringing the mafia in and, having them testify, those media stunts exist. A lot of committee hearings exist solely as a media hook or primarily as a media hook, whether TV has been present or not. So long as the institution has been open, those things have always had the possibility of existing. Second, C-SPAN is not an adequate proxy for public access for the American people. C-SPAN is a product of the cable industry. It reaches out to those who are cable customers. It only broadcasts some of what's going on, not everything that's going on. So although we talk about C-SPAN as a way of being a proxy for public access, it really is not. It is an adjunct. It has assisted those kinds of things, but it's not the same. And the third point that I would make is that I work with someone who is only here in DC because he was able to find out some of what was going on in Congress from his place in Pennsylvania. And the more that people have access to the inner workings of what's going on, whether it's reading transcripts, whether it's watching it on TV or on the internet, whether it's reading about what's going on, I think that's a good thing. Just as I don't think that you should have to come to a basement here in the Rayburn building to get ethics materials, so too should you not have to find out what's going on in Congress only if you're here in Washington, D.C. And I assume that you would agree with me on that.
By the way, let me add to this that the McCarthy hearings basically undermined McCarthy. And they were, they were news clips. And I just had finished a book on Eisenhower in Congress. It's a rarefied thing. No one has written one on this. He actually watched some of that, and he was very upset with himself because he didn't stand up to McCarthy earlier, but part of it was watching it. And I suspect that there are people in the White House that watch hearings, Phil Scalero when he was head of legislative affairs and others, to see what's going on. I think that's good. Plus people in my hometown in Oregon, 10,000 people. They watch it too. I know my mother does. She's 97 and she talks about it. And I think that's good. But it's not a substitute.
This, of course, is the only city in the world that has C-SPAN radio, which is, of course, its own form of entertainment to put you to sleep when you're driving late at night. So we're going to take one last question. Jim?
By the way, C-SPAN is on Sirius, so you can.
Oh, it's on Sirius now, too.
And on the internet, live streaming.
Oh,
And you can
I
get
stand
it, yeah,
corrected.
you can get it in Italy.
Is that true? Cool.
So, Jim, you started your initial presentation. I have not let reality get in the way of trying to improve Congress, and then you reiterated that point. My question to you and Mickey is, what is the political viability of the Sunlight Foundation's agenda to reform Congress, some of their more ambitious goals? And just to motivate the question a little bit, there's a theory that only when there's a scandal can you do the type of things that the Sunlight Foundation wants to do. And you talked, for example, about the last great era, beginning in 1974, around the Watergate scandal that really enabled all these reforms to happen. Do you see any potential scandal like that on the horizon? What type of scandal, might do it? And there might be a qualitative difference between the public now also, now in the past. In the old days when there was cynicism that tended to lead to reform, nowadays the cynicism seems to be so great that theory is, they'll make it even worse. Better to stick with the evils we know than to lead to. So
This is a
psychology
great,
tends to be quite
yeah, this is a great question. Scandal does produce reform. Reform doesn't always have the effects that you want it to have. And Abramoff and the 21 that had been convicted, that started in 2004 or 5 and culminated in the 2007 Ethics and Lobbying Reform Act, which I was involved with, which include other things like earmark reform, which is, I think, is important. I think elections bring change also. This election brought some change, and people should read it right. And that is, you better clean up your act here in Congress. And I think the T group people also have got it right about cleaning things up inside Congress. Now, what does that mean? I'm not sure. We had a hope and change election in 2008, and it may have been reread. It may have been misread in terms of the scope of the agenda that happened, but I think there is that pressure. I mean, we still have Congress at historic lows in terms of evaluation of the place. Now, in terms of scandal, I can't believe the scandals that keep repeating. People don't read history. I was here when Wilbur Mills and Fannie Fox had a little problem. Now, half the group here don't even know who I'm talking about. But, I mean, basically, we have the same stuff going on. And so it's going on right now. Just stop, listen. It's going on now. There's scandal going on now. And it may repeat through some reforms. And much of it has to do with abiding by the existing ethics of the House of Representatives. I mean, people break the code of ethics all the time, and they keep repeating, and it seems to come out of the Ways and Means Committee, Mickey. I don't know why.
Well, I was on appropriations. I always thought there was something wrong with Ways and Means.
Well, there's a scandal there, in my opinion, in the sense that it's legal, but people can receive campaign contributions, and then it's against the rules now, and they can do earmarks. That's a huge scandal, and it's been going on for years. I've done some statistical analysis to show that you can predict the size of the earmark with the size of campaign contributions for people on one of the subcommittees that has a lot of control over them, like in the military area.
Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. You know, we talked now about the problems in campaign financing, and there are very real problems. But there was a time when you could be called out in the middle of the night by somebody who wanted to meet you in deserted location who would then hand you a briefcase full of, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it was perfectly legal. So, we've made lots of attempts to reform the system. I mean, the budget committee, you spoke, glowingly, I suppose, the budget committee. I was on, once when I was on appropriations, I was on a panel with Gephardt and Tom Foley and I think maybe George Mitchell. Anyway, there were a number of us. And we disagreed on almost everything except one, which was that creating the budget committee was one of the worst things that ever happened because that brought everything to a grinding halt. That the appropriations couldn't move forward, that, it used to be that you just had reconciliation, but the budget committee slowed everything down so you reached the end of the fiscal year not having passed your appropriations bills. So, I'm not saying that's true, but that was the attitude. And so reform only means reform. It only means let's change things from the way they were. It isn't always for the better. And, sometimes it just creates a different problem. So you have to be very careful. There's no way that tomorrow you're going to be making sure that members of Congress never do anything wrong, because there is scandal in Congress, there's scandal in the medical profession, there's scandal in banking, there's scandal in manufacturing, there's scandal in the academic world.
No, not in universities.
No, except I didn't mean it. But that's part of human nature. We only elect human beings, some of whom, think they look pretty cool in front of a camera, So I think all we can do is just always be vigilant, and it's almost like whack-a-mole. When you see a problem that hasn't been sufficiently addressed, you try something else, trying to make it better.
So we've gone from the reflecting pool to eternal vigilance. I'd like to thank both of our panelists, Representative Edwards and Dr. Thurber, for coming and speaking with us today. I'd also like to announce that our next event will be on March 14th on lobbying reform at 2 p.m. in this room. If you're interested to learn more about the Advisory Committee on Transparency, please go to transparencycaucus.org. And thank you both so much.
By the way, on that, do you have the ABA report that, I'm on that ABA task force on lobbying reform? Took us 2 years. Is it on your site?
I think it's linked to.
Okay, if you're interested in lobbying reform, we've spent 2 years on this thing. It's really quite good.
And
Hopefully that you're on it.
And we'll have somebody from the task force on which I served but did not vote speaking at the event in March as well.
Yeah, anyway, go to the ABA site if you're interested in a good report. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.